All right, there's been reaction coming in from the New York congressional delegation in Washington, D.C. Kevin Fry joins us now from the nation's capital with the latest. Good evening, Kevin.
Yeah, good evening, Errol. I had a chance to talk to a handful of our New York lawmakers. And generally speaking, I kind of started off with this question, which is this what you expected to come out of this? And the responses varied from shock to some suggesting that, look, the fact that it was even in doubt speaks volumes. Here's a little bit of what we heard from some of them.
It's like a new day. And I hope that the trend continues, that justice it finally is blind. You know, I think we were all on pins and needles because we've been let down so many times.
We didn't get justice for Eric Garner, but in his memory, we fought for justice for George Floyd. And because of the death of Eric Garner and so many others, we're going to work to change the laws in America so we can change America.
Justice is not a guilty verdict. Justice is George Floyd being alive today, going home, and tucking in his kids. We're not going to get justice through verdicts. We have to fight for justice through policy and systemic change.
And so you hear a variety of responses there, and I'm sorry if the control room tell me which lawmakers we heard from. I was not hearing that on this end, Errol. But generally the gist you saw there was this general feeling that, yes, this was one day in this, but there needs to be more done. Here in Washington, of course, Congress has, at least the House has, twice now approved legislation, this George Floyd justice in policing legislation, a litany of police reforms dealing with liabilities for members of law enforcement, chokeholds, and so forth. But once again, the question is, can it get through the Senate, where there is the filibuster rule that seems to be one of the big mile markers to getting in the way? I asked AOC, Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez, about this directly, and I said, look, you know the makeup of the Senate. Can you actually get this piece of legislation, a meaningful piece of police reform, through the Senate? And she basically said bluntly, we need to eliminate the filibuster. Democrats need to get together and decide to wake up to that.
Interesting. To answer your question, it was AOC, it was Hakeem Jeffries, it was Yvette Clarke that we heard from. And Kevin, when they sort of say we can't get past the filibuster, in some ways that's an acknowledgement of almost certain defeat in the Senate under the current rules. Is that a fair way to interpret that?
That is a fair way to interpret that. I did ask Congressman Jeffries about this kind of bigger question when it comes to police reform, because obviously there's only so much that people at the federal level can really do. A lot of the rules when it comes to policing are at the local level, at the state level. And so I said, I mean, is this going to be enough? And his response was essentially, look, we need universal rules across the table, across the board for the entire country. And so there is still this push, this hope. He said that he's cautiously optimistic they'll be able to get something through the Senate. There are conversations going on in the Senate between the parties. Karen Bass, one of the top Democrats on this issue on the House side, is talking reportedly with lawmakers on the Senate side. So we'll see if anything comes of it now that this moment in history has come and gone.
As a general rule, law enforcement is a local matter. The federal government, to the extent that it wants to influence policy at the local level, is normally relying on the power of the purse, right? Either providing incentives or tying important lifelines of funding to it. Is that what this proposed legislation would do?
Yeah, I mean, there's a litany of things in here, but there is, as you mentioned, funding when it comes to, for example, police training. There are some rules that they can change when it comes to liability protections for police officers. That is something that they could change here at the federal level, and they could work on that would impact courts. But that is basically part of the inducement about rules when it comes to chokeholds. So yes, the federal level using the power of the purse to basically induce changes at the rest of the country.
Right. Now, Washington, D.C. is not just the seat of government, it's also a city in its own right. Were they on alert, expecting possible demonstrations tonight?
Yeah, I mean, so there was the preparation. We, of course, still have the fencing around various major buildings here in Washington, obviously unrelated to George Floyd necessarily and the protests we saw last year in some respects, of course, right here around the Capitol building where I'm standing right now. There was a call to bring in the National Guard. Obviously, this is not a state that I am standing in right now, so the mayor has to request that the National Guard were to be brought in. So there was a request put into that. But seemingly right now, there are not really that many concerns about where things go
Okay,
here.
so things are quiet on the streets of Washington, D.C., at least from your vantage point there at the Capitol.
I haven't gotten down to Black Lives Matter Plaza, which is, of course, over by the White House, so I can't speak to the what exactly is going on right there, unfortunately, Errol.
Okay, we'll be checking in with you in the future. Thanks very much, Kevin Fry. That is going to do it for tonight's show. Thanks so much for watching and have a great evening. Stay tuned to New York One at the top of the hour. We'll bring you the very latest on the guilty verdict of Derek Chauvin. And we'll